Ma'am, I'm sorry, but there's no Daniel Hollis on the admission list. I have a Marcus Reed, mid-chest pain, brought in at 6:42. That's the only match for the description you gave me. The admitting clerk at Mercy Medical in Savannah looked up at me with that careful, flat face they train you to wear when something is about to go very wrong for the person standing on the other side of the counter. I was 38, still in my work clothes from a rehearsal dinner shoot, a camera bag on one shoulder, my husband's hospital bracelet info texted to me from a number I didn't recognize. I said his name again. Daniel Hollis, 6'1", graying at the temples, gold wedding band with a chip on the inside from the time he dropped it in the driveway in 2014. She typed, she squinted. Then she turned the monitor away from me, which is the single worst thing an admitting clerk can do. "Is there a chance," she said, "your husband carries a second ID?" I laughed. It came out wrong. "Why would he?" She didn't answer. She picked up the phone and called someone I couldn't see, and in the 30 seconds I stood there holding my camera bag, I watched a nurse walk past a glass door at the end of the hall and into a curtained bay, and I heard, very faintly, a woman's voice say, "Honey, they're bringing the cardiologist now. You're okay. You're okay." Honey? My husband hated that word. He called it a diner word. He had corrected me for using it on our second date. The clerk hung up and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to sit over there for a moment. Someone will be right with you." I didn't sit. I walked past her down the hall toward the bay with the voice, and that's where it started. But to tell you how I ended up standing in a hospital hallway in Savannah last summer, staring through a gap in a curtain at my husband of 14 years holding another woman's hand, I have to take you back. My name is Corinne Whitfield. I'm a wedding photographer, which means for 14 years I have made my living photographing the exact moment two people promise each other the thing my husband was, at that moment, breaking. I grew up in a brick house off Abercorn with a mother who ironed pillowcases and a grandmother, Miss Eddy, who lived in the garage apartment out back and smoked one cigarette a day on the steps at 4 p.m. like it was medicine. Miss Eddy raised me more than my mother did. My mother was a hospital administrator, gone by 6, home by 8, tired always. Miss Eddy taught me to cook rice, to load film, to read people. I can still bring back her porch in my body the way you can bring back a song. The warped wood smelled like creosote and the Salem menthol she smoked, and under that, the sweet dirt smell of the camellias my grandfather had planted the year they married. In July, the heat on those steps was so thick it felt like a third person sitting between us. Miss Eddy would press a glass of sweet tea into my hand, and the glass would be so cold it ached against my palm, and she would run the pad of her thumb along my knuckles while I cried, and she would say what she always said. She had one thing she said, over and over, any time I came home crying about a boy or a friend or a teacher who had been unfair. She would take my face in both her dry hands and say, "Sugar, a man's pockets tell on him louder than his mouth. Watch what he carries, not what he says he's carrying." I didn't understand it until I was 38 in a hospital in Savannah. I met Daniel when I was 23. He was 26. He was in commercial real estate, which is what he told people at parties, but what he actually did was broker warehouse space along I-95 for companies that needed storage between Jacksonville and Charleston. He traveled. I liked that he traveled because my work had me gone most weekends, and we were two people who loved each other best on Wednesdays. Our first date was at a place called Clary's on Abercorn. He ordered a grilled cheese and a coffee. I remember because who orders a grilled cheese on a first date? He told me his parents had died in a car accident when he was 19. He told me he had one brother he didn't talk to. He told me he was looking for a woman who could be his family because he'd been alone a long time. I fell for that. The whole clean origin story. No messy relatives, no ex-wife, no complications. He was the blank page I got to write on. We got married at the Whitfield Presbyterian Church in 2011. 42 guests on his side, all friends, not a single blood relative. I asked once and he said, "I told you, Cor, I'm a ghost. You're my only haunt." I thought that was the most romantic sentence anyone had ever said to me. I want you to remember that sentence. You'll need it later. We bought a house on East 40th in Ardsley Park. 3 bedrooms, a camellia in the front yard, a kitchen with one of those deep farm sinks I'd wanted since I was 12. We tried for kids and it didn't take, and after 2 rounds of IVF that bankrupted our savings, we agreed to stop. He said, "It's you and me, Cor. That's the whole team." My photography business grew. I shot 28 weddings a year at my peak, which is a lot if you know anything about the industry. I have a studio on Bull Street with my assistant Margot, who has been with me for 11 years and who is about to become important. Daniel's work took him away Thursday through Saturday, usually. Jacksonville, Charleston, sometimes Raleigh. He'd come back Saturday night and we'd have Sunday together. Grocery store, long walk with our dog Biscuit, a movie on the couch. That was our rhythm. It was good. I believed it was good. Miss Eddie died in 2019. She was 89. She left me her gold cross necklace and a cardboard box full of letters my grandfather had written her during Korea. And at the funeral, she was buried in a plot in Bonaventure that my mother had bought 20 years earlier. That cross. Remember that too. Here's the thing about being a wedding photographer. You watch couples for a living. You see who reaches for whose hand. You see who laughs at whose joke. You see, at the end of the night when the DJ is packing up, which groom is looking at his bride like she's the prize and which one is already looking at his phone. I had watched 340-something couples by the summer of last year, and I thought I knew what a good marriage looked like. I thought my marriage looked like one. I was half right, half. The first thing I noticed was the gym bag. Daniel had never been to a gym in his life. He played tennis on Saturdays in the spring when he was home, and he walked Biscuit, and that was the extent of his physical activity. In March of last year, a black Nike duffel appeared on the shelf of his closet. I asked him about it, and he said, "Corporate wellness thing. HR is making us do it. I'll probably quit in 2 weeks." He didn't quit in 2 weeks. The bag started going with him on trips. One Thursday in April, while Daniel was in the shower, I unzipped it. I told myself I was looking for a receipt, something I could explain away if he came out of the bathroom. The bag smelled wrong, not gym wrong. It smelled like a woman's shampoo, coconut, and something green, and under that, a laundry detergent that wasn't ours. We used the free and clear kind because Daniel said he was sensitive. This was floral, aggressive, the kind of smell that clings to fabric for weeks. There was a folded t-shirt inside that wasn't his size. I zipped the bag back up and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands in my lap and told myself I was imagining it. I told myself coconut shampoo could come from a hotel. I told myself a lot of things that spring. The second thing was the second phone. I didn't find it. Margot did, and not on purpose, and not in our house. Margot was at the Inn Market on Victory last April buying gas, and she saw Daniel's silver Acura at the pump across from hers. She went to wave at him. He had his back to her, leaning against the car, laughing into a phone, a black phone. Our family phones were both in white cases because I'd bought them as a match set for our anniversary 2 years earlier. Margot told me about it that night at the studio casually, the way you'd mention seeing someone's car at an unexpected exit. "Probably a work phone," she said. "A lot of guys carry 2. "He doesn't," I said. "He's never had a work phone. He's always used his personal." Margot looked at me for a second too long, and then she went back to editing a Palmetto Bluff wedding on her iMac, and neither of us said anything else about it. The third thing was Miss Eddie's cross. I wore it every day. I had worn it every day since 2019. One morning in May, I couldn't find it. I tore the house apart. I checked the shower drain, the laundry, the lining of my camera bag, the console of my Subaru. Nothing. I cried about it for 3 days. Daniel said, "Cor, it's a thing. It'll turn up. Things always do." 2 weeks later, I was in the garage looking for a lens filter in one of the plastic bins where I keep old gear, and I moved a box of Daniel's college textbooks, and behind it, taped to the back of a shelving unit, was a Tupperware container I had never seen before. Inside the Tupperware was a passport in the name of Marcus Reed with Daniel's face on it, a Georgia driver's license in the same name, a second gold wedding band, and Miss Eddie's cross. I want to tell you, I screamed. I didn't. I sat on the concrete floor of my own garage for 26 minutes and stared at that Tupperware and felt my ears start to ring, the way they do when a flashbulb misfires too close to your head. The concrete was cold through my jeans. A wasp kept tapping the window above the workbench, the same soft tick, 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 and I remember thinking very clearly that I could hear my own pulse in the roof of my mouth. And then I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it, and I closed the garage, and I went inside, and I made Daniel a grilled cheese for dinner because that's what he had ordered on our first date, and I wanted to watch his face while he ate it. He ate it. He said, "You're the best, Cor." He kissed the top of my head on his way to the shower. That was the night I understood that my husband was not my husband. He was a character named Daniel Hollis that a man named Marcus Reed had been playing for 14 years. I didn't sleep. I lay next to him and listened to him breathe and thought about every business trip, every ghost joke, every Thursday through Saturday absence, every 42-guest wedding with no relatives, every Christmas he'd spent quietly because he didn't like the holidays. I thought about the gym bag. I thought about the second phone. I thought about the word honey. At 4:17 a.m., I got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen island and wrote a list in a reporter's notebook of every lie I could remember him telling me in 14 years. The list ran 11 pages. I put the notebook in a locked camera case in the back of my studio the next morning, and I called an old college friend named Reeve Akina, who is now a family lawyer in Brunswick, and I said, "Reeve, I need a consult. No notes, cash, off the books." He said, "Come Tuesday." The week after the Tupperware, Daniel's behavior got worse, because that's how it goes. They can always feel when you stop buying it, even if they can't name what changed. He started sighing when I spoke. He started calling me dramatic when I asked basic questions. He started leaving the room when I walked into it. I asked him one Wednesday over pasta, "How was Charleston?" He said, "Fine. Why?" "Just asking about your week, babe." "You're being weird, Cor." "I'm asking about your week." "You've been weird for 2 weeks." "Are you in one of your photographer moods?" Photographer moods was a thing he said when he wanted to file any feeling I had as a creative person's hysteria. I'd let him get away with it for a decade. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just asking about your week." He set his fork down. "Corinne, I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to check yourself. I'm working 60 hours a week for this family, and if I come home and you're going to cross-examine me every night, I'm going to start staying at the Hampton Inn in Macon." He waited for me to apologize. I did, because that's what I'd been trained to do. He kissed my forehead and went into his office. That night I sat in my car in our driveway and recorded a voice memo. I said, "May 23rd. He told me I was weird for asking about Charleston. He threatened to stay in Macon. He is not in Macon on Thursdays." I saved it to a folder in my phone labeled Studio Expenses because nobody looks twice at studio expenses. 2 nights later, he tried a different angle. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, and he came in and stood behind me in the mirror and put his hands on my shoulders, the way he used to when we were first married. He said, "Cor, I've been thinking. You've been carrying a lot. What if I booked us a weekend at Sea Island? Just you and me. Labor Day weekend. I'll block it off." I watched his face in the mirror while he said it. He was looking at his own reflection, not mine. I said, "That sounds wonderful, babe." He squeezed my shoulders and went to bed. I rinsed my mouth and thought, He's scared. He's trying to stitch me back on," which meant he'd felt the thread come loose. The next morning I drove to Reeves' office in Brunswick. I brought photographs of the Tupperware contents, shot in my studio under controlled light with my best macro lens. Reeve is a small man, maybe 5 feet 5 inches, who wears bow ties and drinks Diet Dr. Pepper out of a glass. He looked at the photos. He looked at me. He said, "Corinne, I need you to hear me very carefully. If this man has a second identity, he has a second life. If he has a second life, there is a very strong chance he has a second wife. We need to know who Marcus Reed is, and we need to know it before he knows we know." I said, "How do I find out?" He said, "You don't. You give me these photos, and you keep being his wife for 8 more weeks, and you let me work." I said, "Reeve, what kind of marriage do I have?" He said, "Corinne, I don't know yet, but I know what kind of lawyer I am." So I kept being his wife. I made grilled cheeses. I laughed at his jokes. I kissed him goodbye on Thursday mornings. I cried in my car in the Harris Teeter parking lot 3 times in those 8 weeks. Margot knew. She started coming over for studio work nights that were really just nights where she sat on my couch while I shook. Here is what Reeve found out in those 8 weeks. Marcus Reed owned a 3-bedroom townhouse in Jacksonville on the south side off San Jose Boulevard. He had owned it for 11 years. He was married in Florida to a woman named Juliet Reed, age 36, a pediatric dental hygienist. They had 2 children, a girl, 9, named Poppy, a boy, 6, named Ellis. Juliet Reed had a Facebook full of photos of a man with my husband's face, holding children with his chin, smiling at a Christmas tree in a living room I had never seen. Reeve slid those photos across his desk to me on a Tuesday in July. Poppy had Daniel's eyes. Ellis had his dimple. I had stopped IVF in 2016. Ellis had been born in 2018. I put my hand over my mouth and kept it there for a while. Reeve said, "There's more." Marcus Reed had, over the last 6 years, moved $178,500 out of a joint account Daniel and I held at Regions Bank into a sole account at a credit union in Jacksonville. He had done it in increments of $1,400 to $3,200, wired as vendor payments to a shell LLC called Reed Logistics, which existed only on paper and which had, as its registered agent, Marcus Reed. The $178,500 had paid for Poppy's private school, a Mazda SUV for Juliet, and a Disney cruise in February that I remembered because Daniel had told me he was at a warehouse leasing conference in Tampa. Reeve said, "Corinne, you have grounds for divorce, grounds for fraud, grounds for bigamy, and a civil case against Marcus Reed that Juliet Reed also has standing on. You have a decision to make." I said, "What's the decision?" He said, "Whether you tell her, or whether I tell her, or whether we let the authorities tell her." I thought about Juliet Reed for a long time. I thought about her Facebook photos, her Sunday pot roasts, her captions about how lucky she was. I thought about Poppy, who was going into 4th grade. I thought about Ellis, who had Daniel's dimple. I said, "I'll tell her, but not yet." Because I had something else I wanted to do first. Daniel's mother, in his story, was dead. In Marcus's story, she was not. Her name was Patricia Reed. She lived in a retirement community in Bluffton, South Carolina. She was turning 70 in late July. Juliet Reed had posted about it on Facebook. The Reed family was throwing Patricia a birthday dinner at a seafood restaurant called The Pearl on Hilton Head. 11 people. Sunday, July 28th at 6:30 p.m. I called the restaurant. I said, "I'm Marcus Reed's assistant. I'm just confirming the reservation and making sure the private dining room is set up for 11, and I wanted to make sure the photographer arrived on time." The hostess said, "Oh, we don't have a photographer on the reservation?" I said, "Oh, Marcus wants to surprise his mother. I'm arranging it. Can you make sure there's a place for the photographer to set up near the head of the table?" She said, "Of course. What a sweet surprise." It was going to be a surprise? Of course. Margot and I drove up to Hilton Head on the morning of July 28th in my Subaru. We had 2 cameras, 1 tripod, a zoom lens, and a manila folder. Inside the manila folder were 11 identical packets. Each packet had 1 copy of the Marcus Reed passport photo, 1 copy of the Marcus Reed Georgia driver's license, 1 copy of the Daniel Hollis Georgia driver's license side by side, 1 copy of our 2011 Georgia marriage certificate, 1 copy of the Reed 2013 Florida marriage certificate, 1 photograph of Poppy, 1 photograph of Ellis, 1 bank statement summary showing $178,500 in transfers to Reed Logistics over 6 years, and 1 post-it note that said, in my handwriting, "Ask him which ring is real." Reeve had approved every document. Reeve was also, at 6:25 p.m., sitting in a rental car in the parking lot of the Pearl with Juliet Reed in the passenger seat. Juliet had been told 3 days earlier by Reeve, who had flown to Jacksonville for the conversation. She had thrown up in his office trash can. Then she had said, "I want to be there." I walked into the Pearl at 6:28 p.m. wearing a black photographer's vest with the Whitfield Photography logo stitched on the chest. Margot was behind me with the second camera. The hostess smiled at me and said, "The surprise photographer? Right this way." She walked us to the private dining room. I want to tell you what I was thinking in the 8 steps between the hostess stand and that doorway, because I have thought about those 8 steps every day since. I was not angry. I thought I would be, and I wasn't. What I was very quiet inside, the way I get behind the camera at a ceremony when I have exactly 1 frame to catch a bride's father before he cries. My hands were not shaking. My breath was even. Miss Etty, I thought. Miss Etty, I am looking in the pockets. I had spent 14 years being a soft place for a man who was using me as a cover story, and the strangest thing about walking into that room was how much it felt like finally setting down a bag I hadn't known I was carrying. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unlocked. I could smell the butter on the bread baskets and the brine off the oyster plates and the lemon the busser had just cut, and I could hear a woman 2 tables over laughing at something her grandson had said, and I remember thinking, clearly, this is the last minute of my old life. This is the doorway. On the other side of it is whoever I'm going to be now. Then I stepped through. Daniel was there. He was sitting at the head of the long table, next to a woman I now knew was Juliet's sister, across from Patricia, holding a glass of white wine and laughing at something. He was wearing a blue shirt I had ironed for him the night before. He had told me he was in Raleigh at a property closing. Patricia looked up when we came in. She said, "Oh, Marcus, did you arrange this?" Daniel looked up. He saw me. His face went the color of the tablecloth. I smiled. I said, "Congratulations on 70 years, Mrs. Reed. Marcus wanted me to give everyone something special tonight before dinner." I walked around the table. I placed a manila packet in front of every single person. Patricia, Juliet's sister, the aunt, the 2 uncles, the cousin, Poppy, Ellis. I placed one in front of Daniel. I placed one at the empty seat at the end of the table, where Juliet would sit in about 90 seconds. Daniel said very quietly, Corinne, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm giving a gift." I nodded at Margot, who was filming from the corner on the second camera, because Reeve had told me to document every second. Patricia opened her packet first. Her face did something I have never seen on a human face before. She looked at her son. She looked at the passport. She looked at the second driver's license. She looked at the marriage certificate with my name on it. She whispered, "Marcus, what is this?" The sister opened hers. She made a noise like a kettle. Daniel stood up. He said, "This is a misunderstanding. Everyone, please, just let me explain. This is my business partner's wife. She's having a breakdown, please." I set my camera down on the serving cart next to me. I said, loud enough for the whole table, Daniel, or Marcus, whichever you are tonight. The paperwork in front of your mother is certified. The Florida marriage is 2013, ours is 2011. The bank records are from regions and every wire is time-stamped. You can call it a breakdown all you want. The documents are notarized. He looked at me, and for the first time in 14 years, I saw him. Not the ghost, not the story, not the charming grilled cheese boy from Clary's. The actual man underneath, cornered and small, doing the math on which lie to try next. He said, "Cor, baby, please, please, not here, not in front of my mother." I said, "She should know who she raised." And that's when the door opened and Juliet Reed walked in. She was in a blue dress. She was holding her packet already, the one Reeve had given her in the car. She walked to the empty seat. She sat down. She set the packet on the table. She looked at Daniel and she said, "Hi, Marcus. Or Daniel. Which one am I married to tonight?" Daniel's knees went. He caught himself on the table. A water glass fell over. Poppy started crying because Ellis started crying because Patricia was making a sound none of them had heard before. I walked up to Daniel. I took Miss Eddie's cross out of my pocket. I had taken it out of the Tupperware 2 months earlier and had it in my jewelry box ever since, waiting. I set it on the table in front of him, gently next to his wine glass. I said 6 words. "Juliet's lawyer will be in touch." I turned around. Margot followed me out with the camera still rolling. We walked through the restaurant, past the hostess, out into the parking lot, and got into my Subaru. I started the car. Margot put her hand on my wrist. She said, "Cor, breathe." I hadn't been breathing. I drove us back to Savannah. Neither of us spoke until Hardyville. Within 2 weeks, Daniel had been arrested in Chatham County for bigamy, identity fraud, and wire fraud, the wire fraud being federal because the transfers had crossed state lines. His bail was set at $75,000. Patricia Reed posted it because she is his mother and she loved him even after. Within a month, Juliet Reed had filed for a divorce in Duval County, Florida, with Reeve coordinating with her Jacksonville attorney. I filed in Chatham County. Our 2 filings together created the factual record that made the DA's case essentially unlosable. The $178,500 was returned to our joint account under a civil judgment, and I split it with Juliet because Poppy needed school and Ellis needed a dentist and I had a business and a paid-off house and Miss Eddie's cross. Within 4 months, Daniel pleaded to 3 counts. He got 40 months in a federal facility in Jessup, which is a 90-minute drive from Savannah and about 2 hours from Jacksonville, so neither of us has to see him unless we want to. Patricia called me once in September. She said, "I raised him better than this. I'm so sorry, honey." She called me honey. I let her. I said, "Mrs. Reed, I know you did." We didn't talk again. Margot got a raise, a big one. She earned every cent of it. Juliet and I had coffee in October in a place halfway between Savannah and Jacksonville in Brunswick. We sat for 3 hours. Poppy drew on napkins. Ellis ate a whole basket of crackers. Juliet and I aren't friends exactly. We're something the English language doesn't have a word for. 2 women who are the same lie. We text on birthdays. That's enough. Biscuit is fine. He sleeps on Daniel's side of the bed now, which is the side closest to the door, which is fair. I sold the house on East 40th in November and bought a smaller one on Jones Street, 2 bedrooms, a camellia in the back this time, a farm sink I picked out myself. Miss Eddie's cross hangs on the mirror in the entryway, next to the door, where I see it every time I leave the house. I took a photography workshop in Oaxaca in January. I had been talking about Oaxaca since 2012. Daniel had always said we couldn't afford it. We could. We just couldn't afford it and his other family. I thought, at the workshop, about what Miss Eddie had told me on her porch steps 100 times. A man's pockets tell on him louder than his mouth. I had known, some part of me for 14 years, the gym bag, the second phone, the ghost joke. I had just refused to look in the pockets. I look now. It's 6:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, 1 year later. I'm in my new kitchen in Savannah. Biscuit is at my feet. My phone is face up on the counter, and it's not going to buzz with a wrong name tonight because the only people who have my number are people who know exactly who I am.